Okay, so we're going to wrap up here with a few pieces that apply to any sort of data visualization, whether using just a dashboard or if you're using stories with the dashboards included, or even just stories with just individual worksheets. So we've been talking about ethics and acknowledging the sources and uncertainty throughout the quarter. So here it is one more time. So make sure that you are representing truth or data truthfully. We talked about this a few weeks ago when we were talking about a truthful data viz that may or may not be pretty, but truthful. And then there's not truthful data viz, like data viz that is actually lying because it is false. And then differentiating levels of in between there. So make sure that as you're prettying up and trying to consider like, oh, what is this graph trying to say? What can I do to make it a little bit more obvious that you're not twisting it, that you're representing everything as it should be, and that you're just double checking that all your graphs are representing the data accurately. So thinking about those null values of grouping issues, all those little pieces. We should be crediting our data sources. For the project, it is easy to add in a data source sheet into your worksheet or into your story. Very easy to do. Just add in one of those in the beginning-ish area like I did, or towards the end. You should be tracking all the changes you do to the data. This is not something that would appear in the data story necessarily. This is like your data cleaning things, stuff like that. But you should have like an addendum type piece. For us, it will be included in your data write-up. So just make sure, I know some of you have done some extensive data cleaning for your data sets. Just make sure that you're tracking what you actually did and be able to explain why. Why did you do the thing? And then you should be able to also acknowledge the limits of your data, including uncertainty about how the data was collected in the first place. This applies to anything that you personally did not collect. And then any issues that you found with missing data or odd coding that you couldn't figure out or had to make assumptions about, all of those little pieces. So make sure that we're acknowledging those in the presentations and or in the paper write-up and in your data visits moving forward. Okay, so when we are thinking about how to share the narrative, once we've gotten all those pieces together, what should we be thinking about? So basically the order of operations is to tell us the problem and the question before you offer the answer, because that's just the way that our brains expect to hear them in that order. So with my example one, I offer that framing before we jump into the data and before I give conclusions towards the end. When you are actually presenting it, you should be able to summarize each insight before you show the supporting evidence. The way that this book, the hands-on data visualization, suggested that you do that in each panel was to use the titles and upper space for that. Yeah, so if you don't do it that way, then it gets very confusing. If you do it that way, it makes it easier for us to process. And then last, of course, make sure that your research question and key insights are aligned with one another. Are they actually proving the point that you're trying to explore? Since your audience will be confused if you ask one question but answer another. It's totally okay if you end up tweaking the research question as you get your data to tell that story in order to make it a cohesive narrative. Because especially if you did their advice and did those plannings before you saw the data itself, things might change. And again, my project is a good example of that, where in the data mining class, I was looking for one thing, I found an interesting story to explore that I then explored in this part of the project. And I wouldn't have ever known to do that until I'd actually seen the data itself. Okay, so things can change as you're exploring. Okay, so I have this link here. I'm going to pause 1 second here while I bring this up. Yeah, you don't need to see all my tabs. All right, so this, I didn't want to just copy all of this into a slide, but this might be very helpful for you thinking about the different types of data stories. So if you have data that reflects things happening over time, the earlier example in the slide deck was one of those. That is an obvious one to follow. The drill down is taking the large picture and going deeper and deeper into it in multiple layers. Think about an example of that from last week where we had the all of the, I think it was all UK, and then the next tab brought you down into an individual country, and then each tab was a different country. That would be an example of a drill down type story. Zoom out would be the same but the opposite effect. Start with something that really matters, and then you show them the bigger picture within each slide. Compare and contrast, always a good one. Intersectionality between different things. Explain why something is something by looking at its different factors. And then the last one here, outliers, is always an interesting one where if you notice outliers in your data, you can actually point that out and kind of think through why that might be. So instead of ignoring it, because sometimes outliers are the important parts of the story that should be told. Okay, so those are different types of stories, and then they offer a little bit more advice. This one in particular is probably good. Different, when I showed you earlier, the different sizes for the stories and dashboards, it actually has fit story right there, which is kind of cool. And again, like your textbook, encouraging you to try to plan for fast loading times. So if you notice that your dashboard is being really slow, I'd suggest going back to the Tableau textbook to see if you could fix that. Okay, so that wraps up the lecture. You learned how to do filters, you learned about stories, dashboards, how to put those together. So hopefully at this point, you're actually fully equipped to execute on the project. There's more things that you could possibly add to it, but those cover the basics. So you should be good to go, and hopefully this will help give you a few weeks in order to get everything together, so you're not too rushed at the end. Okay.